Hello again.
Hello again.
We say that because we've just a few hours ago finished recording another video about...
And we're now a little delirious.
Yeah, we are borderline delirious. So if you're interested in hearing instead about sci-fi, go watch... Yeah, go watch the Joanna Russ video where we're wearing the same clothes. Or you made me put a sweater on, didn't you? I'm wearing the same clothes.
No, I'm wearing the same clothes.
Proof.
Could be wearing the same clothes in a lot of my videos.
Like a good radical feminist.
That's right. Yeah, I've got one outfit.
Yeah. But you don't have short hair.
Call me an outfit is overstating it.
And Birkenstock sandals or whatever. That's ideal. I did it. I almost did it again. I reached my quota of that hand signal, and now I snuck another one in.
Yeah, 3 too many. So
what are we talking about in this video?
We are going to dissect the Q&A discussion.
Yeah.
Q&A's panel show on ABC, and they did a segment on inclusion of trans women in women's sport.
Well, I think it was ethics in sport, maybe more generally. And there was a segment on a big sort of segment on trans inclusion. You were there. Yes,
I was there in the audience, ready to be asked a question.
And unfortunately,
which I was not.
Not, in fact, asked a question, which we understand to be quite unusual.
Well, I think they do run out of time, but they skipped me. Yeah, which I was a little sad about.
Yeah, that is quite a shame. Let's come back to that when we reveal another odd feature of the program in a little bit. So what we're going to do is just pop this player up, pause it sometimes. It's about 15 minutes long, that whole bit, so we'll just work through and do some commentary and see how things go from there. So
we're moving on to another part of the conversation, and there's a lot of debate over the question of inclusion of trans athletes in sport. Now, you've competed against a trans female athlete.
I'm stopping it already for the reason
trans female,
and that's Stan Grant, right?
Yes, he's the host.
He does that twice in this short segment. He doesn't say trans women. He doesn't make a sex gender distinction and kind of stick to that language. He says trans female as though the trans person changes sex.
Yeah, or is a subset of female people.
Yeah, and it is quite important because it sort of functions
in this context. Yes.
Yeah, because the sort of, I don't know what, the gender critical and sensible, that bias is the issue, our side of the debate want to draw a distinction, right, between sex and gender identity and make the point that it's sex bodies that are relevant to fairness in sport. So it really would matter that you use language correctly. Yeah,
that's right. It's on the basis of sex differences in sport that the sex distinction is made.
Yeah.
And the question is about whether testosterone suppressants diminish or sufficiently diminish the sex differences.
Yeah, which would be male advantage. And if you're going to say trans females, you can't even really articulate and acknowledge male advantage.
Yeah.
So that's a sort of pretty annoying way to start. Okay, let me jump ahead a little to 30, 40-ish. Is that right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Hannah.
Yep.
Yeah. Just. I mean, you've been through this experience. You're excluded from AFL. You're now playing handball. But when you hear that there was a question of fairness, if we go to that question of fairness, how do you answer that?
My question would be, how much do you understand about what happens to a person's body when they go through that transition? That's where I would start at as the first point, because I can't really address it without knowing how much knowledge is there at the moment.
Explain that to us, because we perceive with our eyes. We so much of what we take from the world is visual. You're a big person, and someone who looks at you is going to think you've got an advantage. Explain why you don't.
Yeah, so what happens when you transition, and this will take maybe 2 or 3 minutes to explain, so hopefully everyone can stay with me, but what happens, you initially go on testosterone blockers and estrogen. Testosterone is a huge driver in muscle, muscle building, strength production, anything that it creates the difference between men and women. And what happens when you transition? You eliminate that altogether. So trans women have less testosterone than cisgender women in their system, whether whatever stage of the transition they're at. And the effects are very, very rapid. And
do we want to say anything at this point?
Uh,
No, go on with his bit.
yeah.
what happens is, I can tell you in the first 2 months, I lost about 20 kilos.
You lost about 20 kilos.
Yep, I was big. My job was to be big, playing handball, and I still play. And that happened in about 8 weeks, but then it stopped very, very suddenly. And the reason that happened is because your body needs muscle to survive. Your body knows that that's happening. It thinks it's dying, and it does whatever it can to preserve it. But having said that, the main driver of it, and in this instance...
Sorry, there's a little clip. You probably noticed when you watched it, there's a very brief slice of a cut to a woman in the audience wearing a woman adult human female t-shirt. And I think if you didn't know the t-shirt, you wouldn't clock the moment, but it's it's great.
Strength is what we're talking about in this, not this, even specifically this conversation with weightlifting, but that seems to be what everyone's talking about. The effect on your nervous system continues unabated at the same rate that it was happening and affecting, the outside appearance, but it continues. And I think, for anyone acquainted with sport knows that the nervous system is what creates strength. It is responsible for a whole range of issues. Muscles are the side effect of training. And so what you end up have at the end of it is someone who possibly looks quite a bit bigger than, they are strong. And what they can do doesn't match up with the outside.
Let's have a little break there.
Yeah. I mean, one thing to say is we're not talking just about strength, right? We're talking about strength. We're talking about speed. We're talking about endurance.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just strength.
No, I think the main thing that stood out to me there is he almost seemed to say the right thing at the start. Testosterone is a huge driver in muscle, muscle building, strength production. It creates the difference between men and women. Yes, absolutely, great. That could have been a gender critical point. But then he goes on to
you eliminate it altogether.
Yeah, he completely conflates this important distinction between legacy testosterone going through a male puberty and what that surge in testosterone does and builds for the male body that you would then just have as an adult male.
Yeah.
And this kind of circulating testosterone at a time thing, as though the testosterone at a time is just constantly building your muscles anew every day. And then of course he relied on that circulating testosterone idea, which, to be fair, the IOC also had been for a long time relying on, right? But to sort of say now he's losing all this advantage, or
all the advantages are immediately eliminated.
Yeah, and I mean I don't know what you think of this, but I sort of thought it's a strange. I mean, I can see why the ABC might do it because they're on that very lefty side of lived experience and that sort of stuff. But it doesn't seem like he would be a very credible source, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I mean if a trans person is feeling very, very desperately wanting to change sex or be the opposite gender, or however they understand that, they're going to have a very vested interest in seeing rapid changes or
I mean, we perhaps don't even need to say that, right? All we need to say is they haven't done an experiment. The individual is just I don't know, making some observations about what's happening to them. They're not controlling any extraneous variables.
That's true, right? So one thing would be what quality of data is that. I think he'll later say that he tracked his own training and handed it into the whatever body was.
Yes,
so that's true. That's one point. You just have this totally anecdotal watching yourself and maybe not having a very good sense of what is actually going on.
Yeah.
But I think I sort of had a further point in mind, right, which is if you have someone who's really distressed about something and has a vested interest in a particular outcome, where for Hannah it would be I am a woman now, or I was a woman after 2 months on hormones, that's not a reliable authority to ask about the sorts of changes wrought by hormones, right?
Yeah. Well, I think Stan set this up, in my view, poorly, he did the same. We haven't shown it, but he started by speaking to Deborah, the professional weightlifter, and I think his question to her was, "What was your experience?" And I immediately felt like, well, what's the relevance of her experience? Or I mean, that could be, you know, interesting and revealing of something, but neither her experience nor Hannah's gives us the answer to the question of whether testosterone suppressants and estrogen eliminate the advantages gained during puberty.
That's right. And he sort of tried to reframe her point. I think she ended up saying it feels unfair for her to have competed against Laurel Hubbard in the Olympics. And then he sort of says, okay, we've got this fairness question. But it's like, no, that's a scientific question, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
If we know that there is male-female very serious difference. And we want to know if there's any real reason to think that has disappeared in the case of trans women.
Yes, that's right.
That's the question. That's an empirical question, not an experience question.
Exactly. That's a phenomenological question. And I think, you know, okay, fine, phenomenology has a place, but then Hannah reframed it as, I'm going to tell you what happens during transition.
Right, as though it's science.
Personal experience. Well, your personal experience is in response to that question.
Yes, exactly. That then they shouldn't have had Hannah or Deborah. They should have had scientists.
Yeah, or that's right. The panel should have been like people's feelings about ethics and inclusion.
Oh yeah, that's true. They could have done it that way too, but it was somehow this hybrid, like presenting it like it's facts, and the audience is learning facts, but they're actually just learning feelings. Okay, so we're up to this point where Hannah has said you could sort of look big,
but not
be big or be powerful.
Look big but not be strong.
Yeah. So should we go on from there? Or should we explain this weird thing that they're about to do, or should we just let it?
What are they about to do?
Turn to an audience member who has been.
Oh yes. So and the audience member will get to ask a question, and the panelists are meant to respond to it.
That would be how it would normally go.
Yeah. Oh no. This is where they speak to. Right. Yes.
Should we just sort of show it and then stop?
Let's show it. Yeah.
Okay.
A hard thing to understand. Is it a hard thing to understand that someone looks bigger than they are strong? It's a hard thing. You say, well, let's.
Did you? I could hear that this time. I couldn't hear it when I watched on my phone.
It's a lie.
Stasia's in the audience. She's the one that was wearing the adult human female T-shirt, and she yells out, "It's a lie." That's interesting because it's on the subtitles apparently, but it's not in the transcript, right? It says something like indistinguishable mumbling. No,
it says it in the transcript. There's
does it?
Somewhere else it says indistinguishable mumbling.
Oh, cool. Because I saw the indistinguishable mumbling and I was like, oh, they got it. They got rid of it.
No.
Oh, cool. Okay, sorry, I'll go on.
Let's go to Ada Chung. Ada, you work in this. You're an endocrinologist. You're an endocrinologist. Take us through this. How can someone appear to be strong but actually not be strong?
Yeah, I am.
So, if I understand correctly, Q&A is supposed to be the panelists who are the chosen experts or relevant people to talk to, and then the people in the audience are either just watching or they're people who have submitted a question and have been shortlisted to ask that question.
Yeah, that's right. And they're just there as in their capacity as community members.
Right. And so in this case, it looks like the ABC has planted a sort of trans-friendly, what do you call endocrine doctor?
Medical specialist.
Medical specialist, right, to sort of like come in on this topic and reassure everyone that Hannah's correct or something, or Hannah's view about looking strong but not being strong.
Or to provide an expert view, but why wasn't Ada part of the panel in the first place?
Yes. Or, okay, good. I guess there's an open question about how, that's true. I'm sort of assuming in advance that the ABC has done a really biased job here, and that somehow they brought Deborah in.
Yes, well, that's right. I mean, because there are some other things going on, right? Like initially, some women complained about the panel being biased. There was not, for one thing, there was not a single female athlete on it, or Deborah made that complaint. And they then invited her on. And so it looks a little like, okay, they added her to balance things, and then they've they've sort of snuck Ada in.
Yes, which sort of makes
to unbalance things.
Yes, like they really want to make sure that the controlled overall outcome of the show is very much like trans affirming and including and supporting, but they've like been able to tick off that they let a woman athlete have a little critical and they pushed her to talk about her experience.
And the one person with scientific credentials has, I mean, it's like publicly clear politics on this, right?
Yeah.
So why not have another scientist?
Yeah. Who's more neutral or who's on the other side to really provide
has drawn different inferences.
Yeah. Okay. Should we listen to some of Ada?
I'm a clinician scientist, so I am an endocrinologist. I treat trans people as a doctor, and I do research in transgender health to try and understand hormone therapy. And so I think people are very quick to make assumptions. What is clear is males have a performance advantage over females. What isn't clear is what happens to trans women after they start feminizing hormone therapy. And so we know that, it is the science behind the impact of feminizing hormones on physical performance is not definitive whatsoever. In medicine, I'm very pro making evidence-based decisions. And, the gold standard when it comes to scientific evidence is a randomized controlled trial. That doesn't exist in transgender health.
So what you're telling me is the science is out, so we don't know.
Yeah, so what we have is some small cohort studies where groups of transgender people have been followed over time, and we have some cross-sectional studies, so a snapshot in time, where trans people on feminizing hormones have been compared to cisgender men and cisgender women. And so based on the limited evidence, what we do know is that trans women lose muscle mass over time. How long this occurs for, we don't know. They gain fat mass and they drop their haemoglobin, which is an oxygen carrying capacity of the red blood cells. And that happens within 3 months. And there's only been one research study assessing physical performance in transgender. I'm talking mainly about women because transgender women are at the subject of debate. And this was a retrospective study looking at transgender women in the Air Force who had fitness data.
Can I come in there? So I've looked at this study, and yes, it showed that there was a decrease in power, and after a couple of years, there was no discernible difference, except for this, that transgender women were faster. Yep. They maintained an advantage when it came to speed.
Yep.
A not insignificant one, around about 12%.
So, there was certainly, when it looked at sit-ups, performed in 1 minute and push-ups performed in 1 minute. By 2 years, transgender women were no different to cisgender women. But for the 1.5-mile run, transgender women remained faster than cisgender women. So there may be a biological advantage. I'm not denying that. But there may also be a biological disadvantage. So when you look at speed and running time, you also have to adjust for height. So the transgender women were about 10 centimetres taller than the cisgender women cohort. And in sport, we typically don't discriminate based on height.
But that's
Oh, we have to comment on that.
On the adjusting for height? Is that what? Yeah, I was going to say if the height is a result of being male, then we do adjust for it.
Yeah. It's a peculiar example. I guess she's thinking...
I think she would be right if it were just height alone, because I guess we're not adjusting for height alone, right?
Exactly.
When we adjust for sex, we adjust for a whole suite of related. So like what height, length of limbs.
Yeah. So she's thinking if they were female and tall, we would not have a problem with that. Right. And then she's somehow saying the speed is not a result of the maleness; it's a result of the height.
Yeah.
And because we wouldn't care within females, we shouldn't care within males. Of course we should, because the whole point is the sex differences, and the sex differences are also upstream from why there's a height difference.
Yes, that's right.
Of course, don't explain within females.
Yeah. So I think if she could show that there'd been a whole lot of, a whole lot of things changed, and only the height remained, then.
I'm not even sure about that, right? Because she would almost have to show. That the distribution of height within males is the same as the distribution of height within females.
Yeah.
Right? Or maybe that height wasn't relevant for that sport, or I'm not sure.
That's a different that's a different discussion, right? About what what are benefits in what sports.
Yeah. I guess I'm thinking if height is usually, it's true. Okay, maybe being a jockey, it's not an advantage, but in basketball it is.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know if you should go case by case.
It's right. Yeah.
Thinking if that's a difference, if men tend to be 10 to 20 centimeters taller than women or whatever,
Yeah.
and that's an upstream. So sex is the thing that causes that, and that confers an advantage in a particular sport. That's still a sex advantage, right? It's not just a. So you'd almost want the same height distribution as women to say that that's not something that we should care about. He just happens to be tall, but males have the same distribution in height.
Yeah.
And that's just not true as far as I understand.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
They also make the point in that study, is it the Roberts study, that that what they find that trans women and cis women do more or less the same amount of sit-ups and push-ups.
So let's talk about that study. So I've just popped it up on the screen in case people want to track it down by its title. It's 2021 study. Shall I just tell a little bit about it?
Yes. Okay. Yes. It's interesting.
Yeah. So this was a study of 29 trans men and 46 trans women in the US Air Force, where there was fitness test data available both before and after the trans person started on hormones. They actually had a much bigger cohort of trans people, but that's the ones where there was data on fitness both before and after. So they state in this paper that no other studies have examined the effects of testosterone or estrogen on athletic performance. And this is quite important because there are studies looking at the effect of hormones on trans people who aren't athletes. So just on the effects on people, like trans people. And then, of course, there's quite a lot of literature on the sex advantage in sport. But this is the only study so far on the effects of hormones on trans people in sport, like competitive sport.
Or exercise,
exercise, which is at least as close to...
as we've got.
So what they've found prior... so their null hypothesis was that the hormones wouldn't make a difference. Prior to starting hormones, and I think this is quite interesting, the trans women already did fewer push-ups in 1 minute than other men.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah, but they did more than women. They did the same amount of sit-ups as other men and more than women, and their run times were similar to other men and faster than women. Yeah. So there's these three variables: sit-ups, push-ups, and run time, and they're exceeding women in all of them. And then after 2 years on hormones, which is already significant because the current IOC is 1 year on hormones requirement. So after 2 years, the differences between trans women and women in push-ups and sit-ups disappeared, but the difference between the trans women and women in the run time remained. So trans women got a little bit slower, but they remained overall faster than women. And the authors of this article, which of course Ada doesn't mention at all, but the authors themselves say that this shows that the 1 year testosterone reduction standard for elite athletics at the time is insufficient, because it's not showing up till 2 years that this difference disappears.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting.
They also point to lots of limitations, right?
Yeah.
What do they say that they don't know? Well, they don't know what people's exercise habits were.
Yes, that's right. Before it started.
Yeah, and they consider the possibility that trans women might be doing less upper body training in order to conform to feminine norms.
Yes.
And conversely, that trans men might be doing more. Because I guess you haven't mentioned that, but another finding was that trans men do after taking hormone they do more sit-ups.
Yes, they do as well or better than
as many. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So maybe they're doing more work on their abs,
which makes sense, right? Because they want to look more masculine, and the trans women want to look more feminine, so they're avoiding doing this bulky upper body.
Whereas these norms incentivizing.
Yeah.
So they're saying, well, this could account for some of the difference.
Yeah, exactly. They're already at a sort of they're not at male capacity when they start, and so it might look like a more dramatic.
And they also make the point that they've shown perhaps reduction in strength, but not in. I think they use the term explosive strength.
Yes. Yep.
That's
right. So
they might be able to do. It could be the case that trans women can do more sit-ups in a shorter period of time, or more push-ups in a shorter period of time.
Yeah, they're very explicit. They say some of the advantages built by testosterone at puberty, so what we earlier called legacy testosterone, that those differences will remain regardless of hormone therapy, and they include height, pelvic architecture, and leg bones in the lower limbs. So they say these anatomical differences do not respond to changes in testosterone exposure among post-pubertal adults. So I think it's interesting that what the paper actually finds is 2 out of 3 exercises only after 2 years have a disappearing difference, and 1 out of 3 remains. But Ada, as far as I saw, only mentions the 2 where the difference disappears, and only sort of acknowledges the 3rd when Stan interrupts and prompts her to. So
and she does acknowledge it.
Yeah, but because pushed, I'd like to see what she would have said. Would she have said that if he hadn't interjected? I hope so, but it didn't look that way, right? It looked like she was saying, oh, like there's been this study and it's showed that trans women lose their advantage.
Yeah.
And that's not really the finding.
And I don't think the authors would say that it's shown this.
No. And these are just 3...
They'd be much more cautious, I think.
These are just 3 things, right? Sit-ups, push-ups, and 1.5 mile runs.
Right.
That's not, there's a huge range of things that you might want to test. So this idea that that is a sort of showing any loss of advantage. Should we go on with her?
What else?
Do we want to show the? Maybe we go on with hers, and then should we show the table from? No, that's from a different paper. Sorry.
Yeah.
We'll come. So let's play the rest of hers, and then. Yeah, let's do it.
Still an advantage. I'm trying to get my head around this because we're dealing with science. You're trying to deal with controlled groups. There are different studies, and different studies finding different things. We know the science is not in. That we've established. But we've got two male athletes here. If you can stand up, Joe and Kieran. Can I ask you to stand up, Joe? Kieran?
It's a loose term, athlete.
You're more of an athlete than me, mate. So you're a gold medalist. Joe and Kieran, male athletes performing at a high level, gold medalist, boxing champion, rugby league player. After 2 years of going through the type of therapy that you're outlining, the hormone therapy, would they not still have the physical advantages that they have had from a lifetime of training and playing and competing at the highest level?
The science isn't clear. So we don't know whether there's a biological advantage or a biological disadvantage. Like someone
Kieran's got an advantage on me in height, and I think you can swim a lot better than me.
Someone who's taller is going to be...
Can I just interrupt and say, I think it was slightly unfair what I just said, because Stan Grant actually interrupts her before she really describes the study, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So maybe who knows what she would have said. That's more tangible. Okay. So sorry, I take that back.
Be able to run faster. They've got longer legs. But the power driving Kieran compared to before he started feminizing hormone therapy is going to be a lot different. So I often give the analogy that, if you imagine a 4-wheel drive powered by a hatchback engine, the quick assumption will be, that 4-wheel drive is stronger. But, in reality, the function may be actually less. And there's been some preliminary research. There's very little research in trans health, but there's a study looking at VO2 max, which is maximum oxygen uptake relative to fat-free mass. And when they looked at transgender women as a cross-section compared to cisgender men and cisgender women, transgender women had a lower index than both cisgender men and cisgender women. Now, this is a small abstract.
And they're small numbers as well.
They're very small numbers.
Joe,
can I just add, though, because there's a lot that's still to be addressed with this, and I need to make the point, too, and I think they're pretty obvious ones, is that at the moment, we're looking at size and strength as the biggest things. That only affects a small number of sports where that would be an advantage.
That is absolutely
I always use the example.
Small number of sports.
We
should show the table from the was that from Hilton and Lundberg? Of all the sports, there's a table of all the sports in which men have a biological advantage.
Do you remember what page that's on? So here's the Hilton and Lundberg paper popping up right now.
Hilton. Yeah, or it's a bar chart. Sorry, or at the bottom of page 203.
Great.
Can you see that?
202.
Oh, sorry, 202.
By figure 1, yeah. Right, exactly. So this is tracking male advantage over female by particular sport.
Yes.
And as you see, it's organized here from least advantage, which is 10 to 13%, rowing, swimming, etc. Middle range.
Hockey, drag, flick.
Yeah, 16 to 22% in the middle here. And then the biggest differences, which are over 50% in baseball pitch and field hockey drag flick, which they explained as this explosive strength.
Yes,
with the upper body.
Yeah, sorry, so I was being misleading. I said at sports, it's at sort of, well, some sports and some sports skills.
Yeah, right, but Hannah's trying to claim, it's just like a very few sports where strength and, size and strength, or strength and speed, strength? I can't remember. Strength and something, maybe you said size. Yeah, but it's not going to be relevant in gymnastics or whatever. It's like, it's actually relevant in quite a lot of things.
Absolutely relevant to gymnastics.
Yeah.
I have a hard time thinking about any sports to which strength's not relevant.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Archery.
Does he have a sort of sexist idea of gymnastics?
Yeah, he was like, that's pretty offensive. Yeah.
Yeah, good point. Okay, so that's a pretty decisive.
Sorry, I just couldn't help myself there.
No, I think that's fair.
I don't appreciate them, the minimizing.
Yeah. Should we comment at this point on this 4-wheel drive powered by a hatchback
the analogy?
engine,
yes, yeah.
View? Because I mean, this sort of presupposes it's almost a machine analogy, right? Like it is.
The testosterone functions as fuel.
Yes, exactly. As though that's all there is to it. So it just matters what fuel you've got, and then estrogen. Lady fuel is the sort of weak stuff that won't power the engine very well.
Yeah, I wonder how the cars drive, and like once you do the testosterone suppressants, does the car stop?
The whole thing is a bit strange. I mean, there's
it's a misleading analogy.
Yeah, so these are like organisms. Of course, they're in some sense like self-powering. They need to have food, and of course, it might throw things off if the hormones are out of balance, and of course, hormones might do something. We don't know yet. As Ada says, there's very little science on exactly what hormones do, cross-sex hormones do. But this idea that like the large human male is just slumped over until you put the petrol in, and then he'd just be totally lost if he only had weak petrol. I mean, that's just silly. Like,
it's misleading. I think
it's pretty misleading. Is this where we should explain, or would that be a bit later? I'm just wondering, where do we talk about maybe it's after Ada.
Of puberty.
Is she going to have more to say? I can't remember.
I think perhaps not a lot more.
Okay, so maybe it would be here.
We could stop after Kieran, because Kieran really stresses the point that that Fina's decision wasn't evidence based.
Oh, yep. Okay, yeah, we'll do that. I just want to talk about this difference between what evidence we have about male-female, what we should expect to see.
Yeah.
So maybe we do that then.
Well, I would be a horrific gymnast. I'd be a terrible marathon runner, diver, you name it. Anything that requires agility, I'm out. And so, also in the discussions that I had, trans people are never asked. A lot of the time, and I did this with the AFL, that I presented my data to them, I gave them what I had, but because it's anecdotal or because it's from me, they automatically rule it out. And I can tell people that, within that time period that you were talking about, the weight loss and the muscle loss I've already spoken about, but within the 12 months, which was the IOC recommendation at the time, my squat went from 200 kilos down to about 70. My bench press went from 150 to 60. and my clean went from 140 down to about 60 as well. So that's pretty significant.
It's like slightly funny, right? I just started taking these lady pills, and then suddenly I had half the strength I had before. I mean, could any of this be psychological or to do with your beliefs about femininity in women?
It's also not. It's also not just about Hannah, right?
No, of course, yeah. So one thing is, but do you think it could be true? I guess I'm just incredulous that it could be true. You're saying even if it is true, he's not the only one. But I'm really, you started taking.
Well, I mean, should we should be open-minded at the outset, right?
I suppose.
I mean, there's also just like what's Hannah, measuring, like not bone density, not muscle mass.
But is it? I mean, I get okay. Do you think it's possible? It's possible that you just are taking hormones and suddenly you've got half your strength in 2 months or whatever. I get maybe that I just find that wild, and so I guess I'm not meaning.
But I mean, we want to say, like we're open to the research being done, and
of course.
So
yeah, I guess it's just if you hear something that you think that
given everything that we know,
that can't. You're not.
That sounds implausible.
Yeah.
No, yes, when framed like that, absolutely.
You're not going through like chemotherapy or whatever, and you've suddenly lost all your strength, right? You're just on estrogen. It's just. I don't. Maybe maybe you're right. Maybe I'm being too who knows? Maybe that is possible, and maybe he's telling the truth. Rather than.
I mean, but there's a difference between. There's a difference between who knows, we're happy for the research to be done, we're going to remain responsive to that, and being like, we really cannot draw any inferences or make any decisions here, which is, that seems to be like, I just like the way Ada is talking really makes it sound like we've just got no idea.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's false.
Yeah, I mean, she did say over and over, I wrote it all down.
Although she did say at the start, we do know there's a difference between, she is acknowledging differences between males and females.
Yeah, but then what? She doesn't seem to link that to the point about trans. She says the science is not definitive whatsoever.
Yeah.
Stan says, so what you're telling me is the science is out, so we don't know. Ada says, yeah. Then later on, the science isn't clear. It's just like she'd say over and over.
Yeah.
It's as though we just could have no idea.
That's right, yeah.
And maybe that's true. Maybe if
and the clarity is achieved only when the science is settled. But for the most part, we make our decisions on the best available evidence.
But that's what I was going to say. It's not clear to me what the rules are, right? Because if she's just saying, insofar as the science of what difference cross-sex hormones makes to sport isn't in, if that's what the science isn't in means just that specific science because there's only been one paper, that's fine. But it seems like a disingenuous claim if it's like the science. Everything we know and can expect isn't in, because then you might think, no, male-female science is in.
Well, she acknowledges that, she does say we know that males have a performance advantage over females. She says that at the start.
I know, but then if she's not countenancing that trans women are males and have that advantage, and now the real question is, to what extent do they lose that advantage?
Yeah, she's entertaining the possibility that hormones are really doing a.
But that's what I mean. How could that be a justified?
How could they alter your bone structure, for example?
Right. We already know that they don't change certain things, which we already talked about in the Roberts paper.
Yeah.
So if you're starting from the point of view, there's these huge differences, like we just saw in the bar chart.
Yeah.
Now the question's only going to be which traits is it plausible that they would be reduced by hormone therapy? And how much of a reduction can we expect? Surely she couldn't then be on national TV saying the science isn't clear.
Yeah.
Surely.
Yeah.
But that's the thing I'm confused about. So do you just read it much more narrowly, like she's just saying the science of cross-sex hormones on trans, and she just thinks it's an open question?
Yeah, I'm trying to be charitable. I think perhaps in the current context, that those claims get heard differently. They get heard as bigger claims like we really have no idea. It's equally likely I guess she does make it sound like that, right? When she says there
yeah.
could be, because she just says there could be a biological advantage or there could be a biological disadvantage.
Yeah.
But that's where we really okay. So like, what does the science tell us so far?
Yeah, that's the thing. So I just feel like she's not presenting on it. Like I feel like, one should say we should expect there to be a lot of advantage that probably doesn't fully disappear.
Yeah.
But here's the evidence we do have that it disappears a tiny bit for some things.
Yeah.
But that's what
and until we've done the research, we can't say for sure.
Right, and so precautionarily, to protect women having fair sport, we should default to exclusion until the evidence is in.
Yeah.
But her position makes it sound like, listen, we've got this vulnerable minority. We really don't know. There could be no advantage at all.
Yeah.
And then we certainly would really be erring on the wrong side if we were keeping them out.
Yeah. And then other claims get sort of smuggled in to bolster this. Like, there's only, I've heard Ada say in other contexts that there's not that many of them anyway.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, if what you're saying is right, then, or if, we really don't know, and if it's the case that there's biological disadvantage, then actually the point about the numbers is really irrelevant.
Yeah. That's the thing, and I wish that if it was a moral or a political commitment, it would just be stated up front, because I think that would be very different, right? If she just said, I'm this kind of expert and I work with these patients, I think because they're vulnerable, our moral commitment has to be to inclusion unless we have certainty in the evidence.
Yeah, that's right.
And then, okay, at least if you said that, we could disagree about the value starting point.
I feel similarly about Kieran. He's is outraged at Fina's decision.
Oh yeah, shall we go?
No, we haven't played that.
Yeah, because I think we should show his contempt. Does it go to that quite quickly after this, or should I skip a bit?
I think it should. Let me just check. Yeah, I think it. Yeah.
We've still got Deborah here with us, and I want to come back to you in a second, Deborah. We've got another question on this. Let's keep the discussion going. Camellia Ling Arbisher.
Oh, yeah, we could skip that.
No, I think because Camille's going to ask a question to Kieran about this, and he'll respond.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. My question is for Kieran. Kieran, you condemned the FINA ban on transgender athletes for being blunt and inelegant. How would you have approached this issue if you had to make a call?
Well, the first thing that I guess I get personally frustrated with in this discussion is we are all sitting here having this conversation as though there is this enormous wave of human beings who are about to wipe out elite sport in the globe, and it is completely, utterly false.
So far.
And no, it's false. And the thing that I also get concerned about, and I've lived this, is that when a group like FINA makes a determination the way that they did, which was not based in science, whether they claim that it was or not, but it's not, because there is not the science to make a definitive call. They've made a rule to ban an entire segment of society based on their fear that one athlete could possibly maybe one day potentially do okay.
But it happened after one particular case, Leah Thomas in the United States, who won by quite a way a college swim event.
She also lost a number by quite a way.
She did, but she did win.
So
it was a 50-yard.
Oh yes, and she's going to say 50-yard, which isn't even an Olympic event. But why? So it only matters if Leah Thomas wins. That is, Leah Thomas has still taken a woman's spot at a pretty high level.
Yeah. I know.
And we're going to talk about, and so Kieran says FINA can't claim that their decision was based in science because the science isn't definitive.
Yeah.
That's a conflation, right? It's absolutely based in science, the science that we have to date.
Yeah, and I guess this is the distinction we just brought up, right, between the science of male advantage, and we know trans women are male, so we can just plug in that expectation, and then the science Ada really cares about, I think, which is the science of the effects of cross-sex hormones. Not that all trans women take them, by the way, right? But so maybe, who knows what...
We also have the Hilton and Lundberg study is somewhere between those two studies, right? And the Hilton and Lundberg is comparing, it's not just comparing males and females, it's comparing males who've had hormone therapy with females.
That's right. So we know about male-female performance difference We know about cross-sex hormones effects on trans people who are not athletes, and then there's this one study so far on the cross-sex hormones on whatever you exercising. Highly exercising trans people, not quite athletes, as you said. That's right. So FINA could have made its decision on both what we know about sex differences.
Yes, and what we know about what hormone therapy does to males.
Yeah.
Or doesn't do.
Yeah. Is this a time to get their table up? That was 206 or 202? 206, was it? Yeah, exactly.
What did it? So they examine the parameters that have a bearing on athletic performance, right?
Yeah. So this is a literature review looking at the effects of testosterone suppression on biology, physiology, and performance in trans women, with an eye to looking at whether there's evidence for the view that testosterone suppression removes male sporting advantage. And so this table that we've got up is all the studies, is that right, that they looked at, table 4, and then over here, comparison with reference females. So LBM is lean body mass, thigh area, grip strength, calf area, forearm, blah, blah, blah. Quad area and so on. So they found
Holly, which table are you looking at?
Table 4, is that the right one? Longitudinal studies of muscle and strength changes in adult transgender women undergoing cross-sex hormone therapy.
No, I think table 4 might be more specific. Is table 4 just about, I think table 4 is perhaps just about lean body mass.
Well, it has a whole bunch of things, thigh area, grip strength, and so on.
Yeah, that's all under the muscle and strength metrics.
Yeah, okay.
They have, I think table 1 is more holistic.
Table 1 is where, oh, I see, yep.
Although table 1 actually, perhaps table 1 is just males and females.
This is between untrained or moderately trained males and females. Yeah, so this is sex differences in general and the magnitude of them. But as you can see, so Ada earlier mentioned only 3. She said trans women lose muscle mass, gain fat, and lose haemoglobin. That's 3. And if you look here, you've got a long table of sex differences that might be relevant, and those 3.
And also the question is the loss sufficient? Yes. That's really the question. Sorry, I meant to say that earlier.
No, that's right. So yeah, there was a nice
quote. You can tell here, right? Like the difference is confronting. If like me, you're raised under sameness feminism, you know, the differences are big in many cases.
Yeah.
But the loss is going to have to be huge.
Yeah, there were various things that really stood out, right? Like, you know, they had those comparisons between the male and female of the same weight in their powerlifting.
Yes, that's right.
And so on, and it was just like huge.
And it was, because was it like in the top level of powerlifting, where,
like 65% higher in the worst case.
65, yeah.
Yeah. So they say on trans women in particular, there's no plausible mechanism for testosterone suppression to change bone length or hip width. So we conclude that height and skeletal parameters remain unaltered in transgender women, and that sporting advantage conferred by skeletal size and bone density would be retained despite testosterone reductions compliant with the IOC's current guidelines. And they say that's relevant at least to basketball, volleyball, and handball. And then they talk about muscle area. So they say that thigh muscle area reduces a bit in trans women, but it's still, and this is weird because they say it's still higher than trans men. I don't really understand why that's their comparison class, and they don't explain it. But they say the authors of that study conclude that testosterone suppression in transgender women does not reverse muscle size to female levels. And then 12 months, which was the typical length of the studies, results in a modest loss of lean body mass or muscle size, but only around 5%.
Yeah. So strictly speaking, Ada, that's compatible with Ada's point, right? But
yeah, they lose some.
Yeah, that's
but
right.
Hardly
but
any.
That's not how people are going to hear it.
No, shit. And they also say, so no study has found more than 12% loss, which was after 3 years of hormones. Yeah. So when Ada says they lose muscle mass, she should have said they lose between 5 and 12% at most muscle mass. Yeah. And then the question would be, is that a loss that makes up for the difference in muscle mass between men and women and equalizes things? Yeah. And I take it that it's not, right?
No. Not when you look at the difference to begin with.
Yeah. So they say, given the large baseline differences in muscle mass between males and females, which is approximately 40%, the reduction achieved by 12 months of testosterone suppression can reasonably be assessed as small relative to the initial superior mass.
Yeah.
So the upshot is that the male advantage is not removed at all in this overview of the effects of cross-sex hormones on non-sporting trans women.
Yeah, that's right. I was going to say, because they do, in the limitations, they do ask, like, what can we take this to show about testosterone suppressants on training? Because these are, sort of what she's like, what's their language? Untrained or moderately trained.
Yes, yeah.
So if you got really athletic or athletic trans women, what would you find? And it's interesting, like, what do they do consider sort of two quite different scenarios. Do they say one, you might find that the differences are less? Let me find there. Sorry, conclusions.
I mean, while you're looking at that, I'll just show that table again of the sex differences. So the last item on this big list, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 main categories with then lots of subcategories. The very last subcategory of cardiovascular function is hemoglobin concentration. So just add an eyeball, that's like what, 1 in 20 or 30 variables.
Yeah.
And that's the one that Ada mentioned alongside muscle mass and fat, right? She said they lose muscle mass, they gain fat, and they lose hemoglobin. But there's another study which I forgot to get ready to pop up by Joanna, Harper and colleagues in 2021, which we looked at, right? And that study, which is called How Does Hormone Transition in Transgender Women Change Body Composition, Muscle Strength and Hemoglobin, blah, 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 blah. I'll put the reference below the video. They find in trans women, hormone therapy rapidly reduces hemoglobin to levels seen in cisgender women. So tick, you get your one variable. But in contrast, hormone therapy decreases strength, LBM, which is lean body mass, and muscle area, yet values remain above that observed in cisgender women even after 36 months. These findings suggest that strength may well be preserved in trans women during the first 3 years of hormone therapy.
Yeah.
So it's like, I mean, I know it's all like not decisive, but it's like not remotely looking like good news.
No, and Hilton and Lundberg say that while it is therefore possible to make strong inferences and discuss potential performance implications despite the lack of direct sport-specific studies in athletes.
Yeah. So there really is. I just think that the overall vibe of the Q&A episode is like,
we've got no clue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The science is out. Like, we don't know, but we've got some evidence that there's reduction. So maybe trans women are exactly like women when it comes to sport. That seems to be what they've left the audience with the impression of, and that is really misleading.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Do we want to go on a little bit more? I think we're at 40 and maybe it goes till around 45.
I think Deborah talks a little bit more, and then
we wanted to talk about Kieran, didn't we? And we've just heard him, but we haven't.
I suppose we have. He's saying I mean, he just, I don't really, I'm trying to understand his view. He seems to think that this is the only decision that has costs. The FINA decision.
Yeah.
He's talking about the costs, right? Like, I just want everyone to understand this has a big impact on society, as though a decision otherwise wouldn't have had a big impact on society.
Yeah.
It's just that society would have been women.
Yeah. No, I know. I found that so contemptuous. And I think because it reminded me, the way he put it, he was like, he used the word tsunami.
Wave? Yes.
I thought he said tsunami.
I might say tsunami later. So there's a wave of, I mean, there's a couple of things to say there, isn't there? Like, would it be inconsequential if it were just
one,
just Deborah, who was after 20 years of training?
Yeah, loses a spot to a man.
Yeah,
I know. No, I agree. I mean, it was really just a complete disregard for women's interests.
And he then talks about, his role being to bring people into sport and have more people doing sport. Women's place in sport is so hard fought for.
Yeah.
And now we're hysterical for having worries about it.
I know, it really reminded me of that
suggestion, right? Like, we're hysterical. We need to calm down.
There was that piece by Rebecca Solnit. I don't know if you remember it in The Guardian. It was maybe 2 years ago. She used almost exactly the same dismissive phrase that Kieran used. It was like, she wrote, I know trans men, I love them, I hang out with them all the time, and there's these horrible bigot feminists who are just like, maybe, perhaps someday, possibly, trans women will rape, it's like, she used that string of like, as though it's such a far-fetched hypothetical impossibility that a male would behave like a male. It was so I think he did that right. He was like, tries to make the critics look,
far-fetched, that are in light of everything that we know. Goodness gracious.
Yeah.
I know, and also false that this is a response to Leah, like people saw Leah Thomas and just freaked right out. Fina started this. I mean, why does he have such a hard time entertaining this? That Fina just thought, this is a question we need to deal with. Let's go and do the research, make a decision.
Yeah, because they say they were working on that for about a year, right?
Yeah, I think it was at least a year before. Yeah.
No, I think that's right. Yeah, but then of course from his point of view, if it's like complete no-brainer that you would just let some men into the women's category because that's where they want to be, then of course he's going to think, well, Fina could not.
Although, interestingly, at the end, so perhaps something a little unfair, at the end he does say, the elite level is another story.
Oh, really?
Yes, which is just confusing, right? Because, I mean, yes. It's like, okay, we'll just be clear that at the start that what you're really talking about is the community level, and you think Fina's decision is the right one at the competitive level.
But that's crazy because Fina's decision was at the elite level. So that doesn't make any sense.
Maybe he thinks it shouldn't kick in that because that what their decision was anyone who hasn't been. Oh yeah.
No, that just I felt like that whole decision was.
Agreed. But he does. He says when I looked at the transcript, he says at the very end, elite. That's another story. And I was like, well, that's this story.
Yeah, I thought that's what the whole thing has been about. Why would they get Deborah on to talk about the Olympics and then be like, this is all just about community sport?
No, that's a good point. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what Kieran just hijacked it to defend the place of trans women in community sport,
but
which is not
explaining that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And which does not as yet need to be defended.
Yeah, that's really annoying. Yeah. So this was just to kind of wrap up, I guess. I thought this was pretty poor. Yeah, in terms of like providing a balanced conversation, I think it was more like a hat tip to shutting up Twitter women by getting one on and then actually just making absolutely sure that no one who watched the show could possibly leave with any other opinion than that trans inclusion is great.
Yeah, and I guess they knew they couldn't show, they knew they couldn't show that the differences have been eliminated, right? So instead what they did, and we can look through the transcript and count how many times they stressed that the science is out.
Yeah.
What do those people have to say to climate skeptics who say that the science there is out? Because it's the science, the standards may be comparable, right?
Yes, that's a really good point. The standards are they're looking for certainty.
I wanted to ask that too. Like, at what point are you going to say we've arrived at certainty now?
Yeah.
Like, this is your question of what are the rules?
Yeah. No, and I suspect it's never right, even if they show there's like advantage in 39 out of the 40.
Because it's true, you can just keep claiming that, right? Like, oh, it's really, we're just not sure yet.
Yeah, and we've only tracked 3 years of hormones, so maybe after 7,
or 20.
Yeah. But still, I wonder how that will help them, given that lots of trans women are not on hormones.
I wondered that too, yeah.
Yeah, but I guess that, yeah.
But so I guess they are, we're tacitly admitting that, right? There does have to be some
transition.
Some transition, and transition meaning testosterone.
Yeah.
Suppression.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder.
Which I thought I was like, oh, that's already a shift, because beforehand we were talking about like that being, being an imposition, and I'm just like.
Well, there certainly are activists that will say that, right? Like there should be no requirements.
Yeah.
But then, you just bring your completely. That's just you just. Then at least we know that the science applies from the male-female advantage. Yeah. They can't be like, well, the jury's out on whether it reduces. Reduces because of what? Your identity?
Self-identify.
Yeah, your identity reduced your circulating testosterone.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Funny. Okay, should we leave it there?
Yeah. The end.
The end.